Okay, folks, so I've got with me a man who's been known for quite many years, and if you're wondering why we're seeing his face up close, we're having audio difficulties. This is the Reverend Freakchild from my younger days.
Yes, hello.
The first time that I got introduced to your music was a demo that you actually sent my way after I communicated with you, and it was Jesus on the Main Line and Your Blues that actually got my attention to listen to some more music.
Right on.
So, are you still living in Hawaii?
No, I grew up there as a little kid. I thought everybody went to school barefoot, and and saw an endless ocean from everywhere when they were a kid, didn't they? Anyway, yeah, it ruined me forever everywhere else. So I live in Boulder, Colorado now.
Oh.
And it's pretty sunny out there. The days get a little wintry, and cold and short. But I'm actually in Seattle right now on tour, and having some car challenges here. There's a coolant leak, and so calling in from some Volvo dealership service center in Seattle, Washington, heading up to Vancouver. But got to get my car fixed first.
Okay, so tell me about Bluesmen of Sorts. This is your last album, right?
Yes, this is the latest album, and it has has an obituary in there, but the rumors of the Rev's death have been grossly exaggerated, mostly by me. But anyway, you read those old. Those old blues albums, right, with this, mythology, like, oh, he lived here and died there, And I tried to kill off the Rev in 2012 with this Blues and Chaos album. I thought it'd be a fun exercise, And I remember a friend being like, yeah, good luck with the tour there, dude. Everybody thinks you're dead. But anyway, I've been studying with this guy, Robert Thurman, who, is a friend of the Dalai Lama's. Happy birthday, Dalai Lama, coming up on July 6th. But he's going to be 90. But, and he started the Tibet House, but he's probably most famous for being the father of Uma Thurman, the actress. But he's this Vajra yoga, master, and we've been doing all these sort of exercises on contemplating death, meditating on death, that it's certain, it's like Pine Top Perkins, Muddy Waters' old piano player. I love the quote from him. He says, death, that's a debt we all got to pay. And all these blues guys, even Jimi Hendrix, talking about, Child, missed you on this one, catch you on the next one, don't be late. It's like, and there's a bunch of death tunes on that album, but there was also like a bunch of, other odds and ends that we never put out. So it's sort of, I put it out as a posthumous thing because the other part of this meditation is that you don't know when you're going to die. So both of those premises of it's certain it's going to happen, but it's uncertain when it's going to happen, sort of naturally arises like, hey, enjoy it while it lasts, and I'm trying to not be depressed, but just have the blues. You know what I'm saying? The depression is like, you're just sitting in bed. You can't even pick up the guitar. So you're like, why live? Because I'm just going to die. But you got to flip that around, I guess, man. I don't know what you expected here. I'm sort of preaching at you, the Reverend Freakchild, right? It's like, man, you got, like my mom used to say, it's like the point is to have a life before we die. Everybody dies. I mean, it was weird. Speaking of Hawaii, I grew up and really, we went to school barefoot. It was crazy, until I was about 9, and we moved back east, and my mom was like, well, you're going to have to buy shoes, wear shoes to school. And I was like, why? And she's like, it's going to start snowing. And I said, what's snow? I didn't know, But I remember driving through a graveyard one time, and I was 4 years old. I had this horrible car accident. And, I can barely remember. I think it was horsing around with the guys in the back seat. Probably pushed me out, and I hanged onto the door and scraped up my knee really bad, so it wasn't really anything with the car. And the mom, I think, was probably drunk driving at the time back in Hawaii, Kailua. But anyway, I sort of had a brush with, some very serious pain there and suffering and contemplating death in some weird way, even as a 4-year-old kid. But I remember driving through a graveyard a short time after that, and I asked my mom, I said, what are all these little stones in here, with people's names on them? And she said, well, those are graves, people live and then they die. And I turned to her and was like, who designed this? Can I talk to this? Who's this guy? The God guy that like designed this, that, all your loved ones will die at some point. Like what? Who designed this weird world with life and death, So I was always had this existential anxiety, and I sought it through drugs for a long time, and then, got into psychedelics, and then tried to medicate myself from all that craziness with weed and booze and all that stuff. But got sober, and I'm actually going up to, if I can get up there, if they can fix this car, go up to Vancouver and go to the International AA Convention. That's actually happening this July 4th weekend. A little bit of a sort of, my statement on getting out of the United States for the July 4th weekend. I don't know. Just, subtle. I'm not going to say anything more than that. Oh, my God.
So how long have you been straight edge?
What's that?
How long have you been straight edge?
Well, I'm going on 19 years. It'll be July 14th will be Bastille Day. So there just turned out to be that. 19 years sober, man. Going on 19 years sober here. So just one day at a time. I had a friend who actually was up here in Seattle, and it was kind of bittersweet, speaking of death. His son died of a fentanyl overdose, and then he died of a stage 4 lung cancer. I think he just died of a broken heart, but he talked about how, it's one day at a time. And he had like 40-something years, and he got a chip, a 40-year chip, and he said, I'll take a one-day chip too, because it's like, he said, I don't know how you get 40 years. You get one day, and it just adds up, and then that's sort of how life works, right? Moments to hours to days to weeks to years, months, years, decades. It's like very weird how we live this linear time, and then you shuffle off the mortal coil, So I've been studying all this heavy Buddhism stuff. It sort of goes with some of the blues, deep, sufferings, It's like, pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional. And I think when you sing the blues, it makes you feel a little bit better. I mean, you listen to them, right? So if you play them or listen to them, it's like, oh, right, other people are going through this, like, I'm trying to get together with my partner, or, I lost my job or got a job, or, joy and sorrows. And, yeah, man, countless bluesmen contemplating the hereafter. And there's a couple tunes on there. We do Lightning Hopkins's, or me, myself, and I, it's a solo version, Death Bells, and, Hellhounds on My Trail is kind of a sad song, like in that way of, I don't know if you've ever heard that. I think that's one of the saddest blues tunes, about...
Robert Johnson?
Somebody told me, the Robert Johnson, Hellhounds on My Trail, it's about really, I think Johnson was ultimately poisoned by a husband of a woman he was messing around with, but, that woman that he's singing about in that song, he lost his child in childbirth, and the woman that was the mother of his child.
Okay.
And that's a really tough thing, that's combining the death, the blues, and the I can't get together with my woman blues, and, generational, passing on this life to the next generation. I mean, I don't think you can get bluer than that, man, so... I just try to do, like Billy Gibbons, the ZZ Top Reverend, says, you do as much work as you can and then just interpret from the now and put it out. I put out a lot of tunes, and people are like, man, that's the most psychedelic version of that tune. I'm like, it sounded normal to me. So anyway, that's kind of what the blues, the bluesman of sorts. I always hear like a British person saying that, like, yes, Reverend Freakchild, he's sort of a bluesman of sorts, It's because my mom was a classical pianist. And that really influenced me. I came back from this piano concerto one time, and I was like, Mom, did you ever play that? She's like, play it. I practiced it like 4 hours a day when you were in the womb. So my ears are developing right there at the piano where she's playing. But then my dad, I think, probably snuck in some blues, and all through my childhood, we'd go drive around, Hawaii and stuff like that. I remember, like, I wouldn't have to wear my seatbelt. He'd be blasting Muddy Waters, and, we'd be eating junk food or whatever. Don't tell Mom, So... that was a huge influence on me. And, of course, it's the 70s, so he's blasting, Fleetwood Mac's The Rumors and some Neil Diamond, and the Star Wars soundtrack or whatever, too, So all that kind of modern influence. But, I think my girlfriend's always like, oh, yeah, boyfriend's a blues singer. And I'm like, well, as much as they call white people in the Europeans in Hawaii, they call them howlies, which means breath. And the thing was that they called them, like, these sailors that were white, they couldn't even catch the island girls. They jumped in the water and they couldn't catch them. So they run out of breath. So they called all the white howlies. So, like, I proudly am like, hey, man, I guess it's sort of like, hey, I'm a howly boy, I'm singing the blues, but yeah, it's kind of a starting off point. I mean, it's a modern age. Like, blues has taken so many different shades, if you will, and variations and influences. And this album was sort of a chance to go back. And a lot of these tunes, like Big Boss Man, which starts off the second disc,
Mm-hmm.
2 CD set, 19 tunes, sort of a retrospective of like past blues and blues influenced tunes I've done. That tune was a conversation I had with Mark Caron about, sort of the Grateful Dead mining the blues songbook, and bringing those tunes that have sort of maybe gone out a little bit, the hippie world or rock world or folk world, and bringing them back to the blues in a respectful way, and then expressing myself. It's like Big Boss Man, whether it be a temporal, secular actual boss, or the boss of like a higher power, man, I can co-create with the universe, but at some point I'm shuffling off this mortal coil. Like, the universe is the boss, man. The situation is the boss. I'm just playing the cards as they come, or whatever. Not to get morose, but
Well, I mean, with everything said and done, how long did it take you to create the Bluesman of Sorts CD set?
Yeah, it's sort of been in the works for a while. I kind of try to do an album a year. But, some of this stuff goes back 20, 25 years. Like that Green and Brown track that kicks off the first disc, which is really the single. That was a tune about coming back from Amsterdam and, smoking tobacco and leaf. You know what I mean? So it was green and brown blues, and I'm sitting there with a million things on my mind, and I still don't know what to do, being stoned kind of thing. And I just never put it out because I was like, is this glorifying, like, drug use? I even say, like, I might take a sip of wine or whatever, now that I'm sober. And I just went back and listened to it. I was like, I'm okay enough with my sobriety and my spirituality. It's like, it kind of means different things now, So it's been in the works for years, but, like, over this last year, we really put the collection together, and there were about a third of the songs that we added overdubs to, because it was just like, for musicians or tracks, you're like, oh, yeah, we could have done that better or differently, it's like, so we added a couple of different things and put some, icing on the cake of a couple tunes, but Green and Brown got transformed from a song about smoking dope to a song, like a love song to the earth. I found this, I actually encountered this other yogi. It was down at this ashram in Bahamas, the Shivananda ashram. And this woman, Kamala Devi, Welsh lady, said, "Oh yeah, so I'm a filmmaker." Sorry, I do a horrible British accent, but I loved it. Anyway, and I said, "Really?" And she said, and she just said out of the blue, "I always wanted to make a video." And I was like, "Oh, awesome!" So she made this video for Green and Brown Blues that really transformed it from a song about drugs to a song about, look at the green and the brown of the earth. She's a real eco artist. Like talking about, Earth's rights and the nature's wisdom and stuff like that. And I found this great Albert Hoffman, the guy that synthesized LSD. He had a great quote about, like, look at the brown and the green of the earth. It'll bring you back. And I was like, oh my god, that's perfect. Kind of thing. And I have to note that my one suggestion for the video was this Mark Rothko piece called Green, Brown, and Blues, and she did this, like, double imagery. If you see it, it's in the second verse. You're like, oh my god, that's the Mark Rothko painting back there. I was like, I had one suggestion. I had one idea, for the video. So, yeah.
So, right now, are you touring for the new album at all, or is it okay?
Yeah, right now, I've been doing a lot of radio and heading up the coast and doing some dates. I mean, geez, it's really just an anxious craziness. This is the third time I brought this car to this dealership, and it just keeps overheating. And so, this has happened before. Like, I was on tour, what was it, not this spring, but last spring, and I went down, Desert Way, Santa Fe, all that kind of stuff, and the check engine light comes on, and you're like, oh. These are sort of like the luxury problems of going on tour. You're like, oh, right, I need a touring vehicle, you know what I mean? So I remember one time there was a check engine light that they couldn't even figure out. I was driving a hybrid, and the guy was like, I don't know what's going on with this thing. Like, but, I'm driving, like, 5 days straight, like, 5, 6, 7, 8 hours, this is putting a stress on these things. I feel like, Brad Pitt from the new F1 movie or something like that. All right, come on, guys, get it up to stuff, and we'll get it back on the road, now. So I'm just trying to be here again with these guys, and it's just kind of frustrating,
Well,
But
frustrations, automotive frustrations aside, what's your best experience on touring and worst experience?
oh wow, yeah, that's a whole book. And I'm writing this book about the recovery and the Buddha Dharma, about being in recovery and
Uh-huh.
Buddhism, because I got my Master of Divinity, and that was my thesis. But I'm trying to turn it into a book. But that would be the next book. I think we're going to call it Musings of the Reverend Freakchild. There's just so many crazy stories. Like I don't think like what like driving out in the dead of winter from Colorado to open up for Mike Zito and Samantha Fish, just some random one-off gig, and
Wow.
visiting my cousins and having a Christmas time with them, and just having a party and playing to thousands of people in this huge, stadium from this guy. Jeez, what was his name? The DJ out there in Ohio, I mean, it was just like a random trip, but he gave me a bunch of bread, and we just like, dude, have gig, we'll travel, man. And it was a fun time, most difficult parts of tours is like this, is sitting at the mercy of somebody else going like, oh, it's fixed, and then you drive it 2 blocks and it's like, dude, it's still leaking, it's overheating, what are you talking about? It's like you're at the mercy of the situation, you know what I mean? And you find good people and bad people, and geez, like the other night when I really broke down, which was 2 days ago now, I had it towed, and then they said it was fixed yesterday, and I brought it back, and now I'm bringing it back again, 3rd time's a charm, hopefully. But, I was like, my phone was dying, my car died. I was like, oh my God, man, And I wandered into this little sushi place, and the guy was like, hey, how's it going, man? Yeah, sure, I got a phone charger. I was like, oh my God. He's like, you want some sushi? I was like, yeah, man. And he was like, oh yeah, it's probably just a fan belt, or something like that. And I was like, oh my God. So I remember I was in Sofia. We were trying to go down to Istanbul on tour. This is like a long time ago. And, turned out to be like Friday 13th in hindsight, but it was just like everything was just not going our way. We got trapped in the border between in the no man's land between Sofia and Turkey, and couldn't get in. And then finally the next day we were just like, okay, the guard changed, and we were like, we're going back into Sofia. They're like, okay. Like, thank God, like they'd taken our passports for a while. I mean, it was just like dicey, right? Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden there was this bus that came by, stopped, and we got on, and this lady said, oh, you look like you're from out of town. I can help you out. And we were like, oh my God, are you an angel? So every once in a while, you just keep an eye out for the good signs. But, you got to sort of just, when you're going through hell, just keep going, kind of thing. So, yeah, the scheduling and the weariness of being on the road. But there's some, what is that Grateful Deadline? You're tired of hanging around, you want to travel. You're tired of traveling, you want to settle down.
Mm. That's pretty much the case.
They're let out now. Yeah.
So, I'm assuming that your girlfriend supports your your touring and your music.
She's coming. She used to travel out a lot more. Like, she would come off to the big gigs. Like, I did this huge festival in Chattanooga a few years ago, and she was like, "Oh yeah, I'll come up for that." And, it's like, and it's fun too because we got treated like rock and roll royalty. You're in the little golf cart, and they're giving you, hey, do you want a water? And you ride to the backstage, and we're like, oh, cool, like playing for thousands of people. And then like 2 nights later, she was like, okay, like I'll travel with you. She doesn't really like driving so much, so she'll fly out. But like 2 nights later, we drove to some other town. It was like I was the feature at an open mic, and they're like, well, I can't give you 2 veggie sandwiches, but you guys can split one. And I'm like, man, the vicissitudes of the rock and roll lifestyle of life. It's like one night you're a rock star, the next night they're like, who are you? It just depends on what town you're in, you know what I mean?
I guess. Now, apart from all of this, you writing music, playing, composing songs, creating albums, and touring, and having the love of your life by your side when she decides to come, what do you even have time for hobbies?
Oh yeah, man. I was writing this book about recovery and the Buddha Dharma, and some days I'll do a radio show, some days I'll do a gig, sometimes I'll go to a museum or see some friends or family, you know what I mean? But pretty much every day, and it's changed now since post-pandemic because I can get online and go to a meeting, but I was like kind of doing the math. I was like, dude, every day on tour I would find an AA meeting, or a recovery meeting. So it's kind of, they say that in the big book that it's an avocation. You talk about a vocation, which I got the vocation of being the reverend, and people say, what's up with the Buddhism? And I say, I don't know, man, maybe I was a Buddhist in a past life. My mama used to read to us out the Bible, and I tripped on acid, thought I was Jesus, that got a little dicey. No disrespect to Christianity, but, Buddhism's kind of was like this cool ice cubes in the hot beverage of Christianity in my mind. But anyway, I really was like, man, the most consistent thing I do on tour is go to an AA meeting. I went to one last night, and it was like this hot room, and I just caught like the last 5 minutes of it, but there's some kind of magic that happens in there. And, it's an avocation. I say it's a hobby that keeps me out of jail.
Okay. That works.
Right? Anyway, not to belittle it, but and then if anybody's out there, suffering addictions, all you got to do is reach out, man. Just lay hands on the radio, baby. Call somebody up or just approach somebody. There's a lot of people that want to help you because people realize that the only way for them to stay sober and healthy and in recovery is to, help somebody else. So I try to do that, but over the pandemic, talk about being a hobby. Like I picked up the phone, there was some like sponsee like freaking out, and we were all freaking out, right? Like I said, everything's fine, yeah, fucked up, insecure, neurotic, and emotional, right? But I got off the phone, and my girlfriend's like, "What's wrong with you?" And I was like, "I don't know. I think I'm turning into a person. Like I think it was helpful to this kid, because I'm kind of a recovering asshole too. But whatever. Furry Lewis was a crazy man too. So anyway, blah,
okay.
blah, blah. Yeah, hobbies. Photography is always a good one. I love it, too. I
can imagine. Your eye catches a lot of things, especially with your experiences from the past. So my last question, I could ask a lot more, but in reality...
Thanks for having me, man. Yeah,
well, the last question would be simply this. What's your favorite food dish?
Anything my girlfriend cooks, right? She cooks so healthy. I was joking with my cousins out here. I was like, sometimes I got to go to the 7-Eleven and get a candy bar. It's like I got a sugar stash. I'm still caffeine and sugar. Getting off the gluten and the dairy, but and all the chemicals, the hard drugs, even the soft drugs. But favorite foods, man. I think I miss bread and I miss Coca-Cola. You know what I mean? I had a root beer the other night, but it was like, I'm getting old, dude. I'm getting old. It's crazy. A nice cool glass of water. I tell you, I was traveling in Nepal, and I realized like how amazing it is in the first world, in the civilized world, a clean, cold glass of water. Like, wow, what a luxury, because some people don't have that, man. Not half the earth. It's just has to go down to the well and purify water and stuff like that too. So
yeah, well,
maybe I'm just gonna go with that right now because I feel like I'm thirsty after talking to you so much.
It's like Castaway. You can't abide the fact that you don't have ice on an island.
Yeah, right. You gotta wonder what that was in that package. My friend was like, it's like one of those international cell phone things. He's like, like it could have been. Anyway, yeah. Well, great talking to you, man, and thanks for having me on, dude.
Yeah, no, it was my pleasure. After so many years of actually wondering who you were and what you did, and having that fabulous, it was I think it was a demo CD that you had sent out that had Your Blues and Jesus on the Main Line, and I wanted to play it a while back. Unfortunately, I discovered the vagaries of CDs. If you keep them in the wrong place, bacteria will actually eat the metal inside the CD, so it destroys the CD completely.
Everything's impermanent, man.
Yeah, that's it. But you're here. You're here, so that makes it permanent. That and the fact that you believe in your music, and you're a Buddhist at heart now and forevermore. We can't ask for more. You're a fabulous artist. You're a fabulous man.
Thank you.
And as much as you feel old, I'm 50. I'm going on 51. So.
Yeah, you're right about with me. It's just. But I say to people, before the pandemic, I was the oldest of the young people. But coming out of pandemic, I'm the youngest of the old people now. Oh man. Birth, old age, sickness, and death, man. Hopefully we do it gracefully. But
okay.
Hey, what else are we gonna do?